Hello everybody, I'm Hexagon Witch, and in this video I'm going to share some tips, tricks, as well as some secret techniques to Lode Runner. Earlier this year in January, I introduced something, or announced something called the Lode Runner Community Challenge. This is a challenge to try and get Twitch streamers and other retro video game enthusiasts interested in Lode Runner who might have previously overlooked these games. A few people have already taken up the challenge, and seeing how that has panned out so far, I've decided to make a few changes, mainly in how the points work. So previously, you would have played the games and earned points for completing levels, as well as bonus points for completing entire games. I've now decided to kind of change, first of all, how many points you earn. Normally it was like 1 point per level. I'm going to change that to 100 points, and this is mostly just so that it will look cool come December. And changing the sort of bonus points that you would earn to really be at completing any 50 levels, any 100 levels, and any 150. So it's a 3-time, amount of bonus points you can earn. And after that, it really is about, playing as much Lode Runner as you can, if you want to, or if you care. But mostly I want to encourage people to sort of dip their toe in and try out different games. Maybe they like the NES version, but they don't like the originals. Or maybe they like one of the later sort of reboots and don't really care for the originals as much. And of course, the time frame for the challenge doesn't really change. So I forgot to mention that earlier. So it started in January, and it will last till the end of November. So it's actually 11 months, not the full year. In December, I will have a big stream and tally up everybody's points, announce a winner or whatever. A whole bunch of silly stuff. Maybe even have people on, and who knows. This is inspired a lot by Dot's Classic Vania challenge that runs through the month of October, but I didn't really want to do it for just 1 month. I thought I would run it for almost an entire year. That way people can get into Lode Runner at their own pace. With that being said, though, let's get on to some of those tips, tricks, and of course, secret techniques. Most Lode Runners will typically feature some kind of level selector, and this is really useful because playing through the game and trying to sort of 1 credit clear it isn't exactly easy to do. The games give you a limited number of lives. Start with 5 typically, and you would usually only gain a life after completing 1 level. So if you game over, you can easily just use the level select and resume back where you got your game over. Of course, you could also use this to skip levels, and this was part of the reason why I decided to change the bonus points for the challenge, was so that if people encounter a level that's really a wall for them, there's a few really bullshit levels that I don't like, and so I felt like I wanted to give people the option to skip those levels, to allow them to play the games at their own pace and really have more fun doing so. Speaking of pace, a lot of the early games will also let you change the speed that the game runs at to be faster or slower. The NES version actually lets you do this, if I recall correctly. I don't remember how to do it, I just play at the default speed. It's already plenty fast, but you could also decrease the speed if you feel the game is too quick. I have encountered Lode Runners that I think are way too slow, and I wish I could speed them up. Of course, if you're finding that a specific game isn't really gelling with you, you can just hit the bricks and leave, you know? I've already done that twice this year. I tried playing through the two TurboGrafx Lode Runners, the PC Engine. Sorry, I blanked on the word for a second. I played through those two games and was not enjoying them. And so, yeah, I quit both of those. The points would still count for me if I was tallying up my own points, and I guess I will. I'll probably do that. I actually think at the moment I wouldn't even be winning my own challenge, so I'll have to get back on it. Of course, I think the main problem with trying to learn Lode Runner is that most of us now, we're adults. We don't have as much time, maybe not as much patience. And Lode Runner really is a game about trial and error, and that you're not always going to see what the solution is, and so you'll have to try something out, and maybe that's not actually how to do it. This happens to me a lot, and beyond that, it also kind of becomes about memorization, and we'll get to some of this later, but sort of, you know, having done a level once, you know, doing it again, and then sort of seeing different things that happen if you know, complete a level a certain way, and so, you know, it's a good idea to sort of remember if you're trying to play through them again. But yeah, there's a lot to learn, and most of it is really about specific level layouts. Lode Runner is famously inspired by an arcade game called Space Panic, and actually a number of games similar to this, like Mr. Do's Castle or something. I don't remember the title of that game. Would be classified as sort of like trap 'em ups. The idea being that you can dig holes to trap enemies in them, and those holes will close up and kill the enemies. Sometimes that's the objective, like it is, I think, in Space Panic. Go Alien is like that too. But digging is very important to these games. Of course, learning how to dig properly, or not properly, but learning the sort of tricks you can do with digging in Lode Runner will really benefit you. There's a few things to sort of understand about it, how it works, what you can and cannot dig, so we'll go over that real quick. Whenever you begin digging, if an enemy steps on the tile that you're digging before it's complete, it'll usually interrupt this. This happens in most games, as well as like the NES version and the original home computer ports. You know, so you want to sort of dig early enough that that won't happen. Usually you have situations where missing or like having your dig interrupted will usually get you killed. So it's something to really plan ahead, like you have to really think ahead of, okay, this is the right time to dig, and you don't want to delay too long. In order to dig a tile, the tile above it has to be completely empty in most games. it would include gold pieces, enemies, of course ladders and ropes. That last one tricks me a lot. I forget that one. And of course other tiles as well. You can also dig even if you're not standing on on a tile. Like if you are on a rope or a ladder, you can still dig tiles next to you, so long as they are, valid. The game will often ask you to dig multiple layers, and there's different ways this can sort of look. Usually though, you have multiple layers that you have to dig through to get to like an open space that has a gold piece in it, and you can sort of count the number of layers you have to dig through, and that's the number of holes you have to dig to get that started. Say if there's 2 layers you have to dig through, you only need to dig 2 holes. 3 means you have to dig 3, and the highest that you can get to is 5. Digging 5 layers requires you to be really fast, and if you try to dig 6 layers, the blocks closing in will catch up with you. So you cannot usually, in most games, it might vary, but usually you can't dig more than 5. Of course, there can be exceptions to this. Of course, ladders, ropes, or even empty tiles can be used to sort of reduce the number of tiles that you would have to dig at the top, or allow you to, dig really deep down if there's a lot of empty tiles, sort of stack of blocks that you're trying to dig. And so yeah, that's generally how digging works, but let's talk about how you can dig really fast. So when you dig, it's sort of a commitment, right? You can think of it that way, that it's a committed animation. When you press the button, you dig, and you are stuck in place while that digging is taking place. This allows you to sort of buffer inputs. Once you have begun digging, you can hold the direction that you need to move next. Say, you're digging down a ladder, like you're on a ladder and you're digging a bunch of layers just off the side of the ladder. You dig and you can just hold down, and I actually can just hold down the entire time and just pressing dig at the right times, and it will dig down that column very quickly. Another thing you can do, although this is very difficult to really make use of, depending on how fast the game is that whenever you press the dig button, it will align you to the level grid. So the runner in at least the 2D games, doesn't have to be aligned to the grid. So if you take a few steps but you're not fully on a tile, when you press the dig button, you'll move. And so you can actually press the dig button a little bit early, and it will automatically move you. And this movement is pretty quick. I don't know if it's any faster though. I don't really use that in most games. In Lode Runner 2, which is my favorite, you are actually aligned to the grid all the time, and so you can actually hold the dig and sort of buffer both digging and running pretty smoothly. But yeah, that should help you learn how to dig very quickly. Say if you need to dig several tiles in a row, and just holding the direction and pressing the dig at the right time is really the fastest way to do it. The bulk of the rest of my techniques that I have to share here are really concerned with the enemy AI pathing. So to really understand that, we're gonna kind of summarize how it works in the code, and then talk about how we can use that to our advantage. So in the original Lode Runner, one of the things that was sort of praised for was that the AI pathing doesn't use up very much memory. It's, I guess, very well written for being compact and not having too much code. However, this limitation led to a number of quirks and very odd behaviors. And playing through, you would probably notice most of these. However, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't until I came across an article from the blog Data Driven Gamer, which I will link down in the description. It wasn't until I came across this article that I sort of really understood what was going on, and it kind of upped my game quite a bit to understand how it works. So from this blog post, someone had ported the code to C, and that post summarized, how it works. So yeah, big shout outs to that, because like a lot of explaining this is really from that. So the guards have a number of steps that they try to take. The first is, of course, is they look at the level that they are on, and they will just run to the runner. This will ignore any holes that the runner has dug, and it will also ignore walls. So if there is a wall between the runner and the enemy, the guard will just walk up to the wall and then stop. However, this movement does not ignore pits that are already there in the level design. And so if there is a pit between you and the enemy, they will move on to the next step. The next step is, of course, to get closer to the runner's level. And it looks in several directions and sort of ranks different paths that it can take until it, and then after it's all done with that, it takes the path that has the best rank. So to do this, it first looks down if it can move downwards. This is if it's standing on top of a ladder, or if it's on a rope. It can do this, and it will look at all the places on that downward path where it can disembark. So if it's going down a ladder, it looks at all the places where the ladder meets a block that it can walk across, or it meets a rope or something. And it ranks them based on how close they are to the runner's level. If they are at the runner's level, the rank is 0. If it's 1 away, it ranks at 1, so on and so forth. It then will look up. Again, if it's at the base of a ladder, it will look at that ladder and do that same ranking. Then it will look left, and it looks at all the ladders and places where it can drop, or all the ropes and stuff, and it ranks those paths, and it ranks them from left to right. So it starts with the leftmost and goes right. Then it looks, of course, to the right, but it still has that left to right reading order. And I'll touch more on that a little bit later. So after it's ranked all these different paths, it prioritizes doing, three different things. The first, of course, getting on the runner's level. The same level as the runner is the highest priority. Then it will prioritize getting above the runner. And so even if the paths that were above the runner were, shorter, it will still prioritize those. And of course, then it prioritizes getting below the runner. Finally, if it can't do any of those things, usually because it's stuck in a hole, it will just stop and it won't move. And of course, as I said, everything is from left to right, but it's also, I think, top to bottom. I don't think the article really touched on that, but that makes more sense with how I've sort of seen things. But it doesn't really matter because of that priority that it will always prioritize getting above the runner first. And so this means that if there are two paths on its level that have the same rating, it will take the leftmost one instead of the right one, usually. Using the knowledge that we now have about how the guards path around, we can really start to understand their quirks as well as the ways that we can manipulate them. So one of the first things you might notice is that occasionally they will get to the top or a bottom of a ladder, and they will sort of wiggle up and down. Other times they will enter loops where they'll fall off a ledge, then fall again, and then go up a ladder, and then continue around. This is, of course, because of that sort of priority, that they don't really see their current position as a valid disembark point. And so they're always looking to improve or get closer to the runner. So they'll get into a situation where, say, they're going up a ladder, they see a path up, and they say that this path is the highest ranked path. It will take a step up the ladder. And because they do this calculation every time they take a step, they recalculate, and the level that they just left is actually better. And so they take a step down and then a step back up, and they get into sort of wiggle loop. I love when they get into the wiggles. I think it's really funny. And there are levels that have kind of specific layouts where they can actually loop, and they will run around in circles. There's a few other quirks to mention as well. These don't come up as much. One is concerning if you have a ladder that is next to a wall that is too wide, it will see tiles of that wall as valid disembark points, even when they can't actually move there. And so it'll kind of get stuck. This is actually something that happens in the very first level of Lode Runner. Enemies will also see each other as obstacles. If they bump into each other, they might suddenly take a different path. This is something that happens. You'll be trying to get them to take a leftmost path, but then they'll hit the back of a different of another enemy, and then they'll sort of turn around sometimes, and that's why that happens. And of course, many of the different ports and sequels that you'll find are not quite accurate. The pathing that I've given is pretty accurate in a number of versions, like the NES version, with some, I think there's some differences, but of course most of the home computer ports as well. So on to the sort of, finally, after we've gotten through all that, here's some techniques that will help you deal with the enemies. It is very useful to usually corral enemies together so that they are all in the same place, and you're not surrounded by them. And there's a number of things you can do to get this to happen. But really what you're aiming to try and do is make space, get them far away from what you're trying to do. And that's like the most important thing. Corralling them together might help you with that, and might not. So it kind of depends on the level. One thing you can do, I've started calling this draining them, and that is to, if you're on a ladder and they are on the other side of the level, this happens a lot, and you want them to be at the bottom. So you would go to the bottom of the level and then sort of wait, and that sort of drains them down to the bottom. Of course, you can just straight up lure them somewhere, and so if you have watched me play any, sometimes I will just sit there for a bit until, you know, the enemies are close to me, and then I'll start running away from them. And it really is to get them away from whatever it is that I'm trying to do. Another important thing, and this is true through most levels, not all, but actually you tend to not want to kill the enemies a lot, and there's a number of different reasons for this. But the main reason is that the enemy's pathing is not very random, but where they spawn at the top of the screen after they die is. It's also random when they pick up and drop gold, if the game that you're playing allows for that. A few of them don't. But typically it's a thing in Lode Runners. They'll pick up the gold and move it around. It can be really annoying. That you just kind of have to deal with, but them spawning at the top is something you can kind of control, and it really is about figuring out, again, the corralling, the luring, draining can sometimes help you in not killing the enemies. So when they die, and they reappear at the top of the screen, they're also, they typically have better paths to get to you as well. And again, in like certain games, the screen will scroll, and so if they spawn off screen, you might not immediately know where they are. And that's typically not good. And I'll talk more on how to deal with that later. So, the final thing you can really do is just to manipulate them because of their pathing quirks. Usually when you move left or right, they won't change their path. They will sort of check, every time you move. And so I have seen them sometimes kind of change if they're like in a loop. But usually you won't see them change too much. But when you're moving up or down, if you're moving like up or down a ladder, or if you're falling, they will change their path a lot. And so one tip I have is that you can check the heights of a ladder. So as you go up and down a ladder, you sort of stop and you see, what are the enemies doing? Are they moving away? And it's a good way to check. So if I'm at this point, where in the level do the enemies want to path to currently. And as you do that, over time you'll get a better feel for how that pathing works. But it can also just be really, useful in getting them away from you. As I said, making space. Just hanging out for a second on a ladder and getting them far away. Usually they'll end up in one of those loops, or they'll, be wiggling. And once they're there, you can then sort of plan your next move. Of course, the easiest way to get enemies away from you and where they're not in your way is to get them into holes. I've made the joke many times that Lode Runner is a game about stuffing dudes in holes. And so often there will be sort of natural pits that you can use all of these techniques to get the enemies to fall into those pits. Sometimes they're on a rope and there's a bunch of one deep, one wide pit, 1x1 pits beneath that rope, and you can, if you fall down, sometimes they'll fall into those pits. As your height level changes, they'll see that as like the best way to go, right? Of course, if there is gold in the pits, you kind of want to get that first before you get them in there. A lot of times as well, you'll see levels where the enemies are already stuck and they have gold in with them, so you have to free them. That is super common, actually. And so, dealing with that, usually it's good to sort of do that last. Sometimes it's not. That kind of depends on the level. And usually, when this sort of thing happens, or like that design element is in a given level, the level designer puts some way for you to manipulate them in there, because it's very intentional. Sometimes this is just killing enemies. Killing enemies will put them into a pit sometimes, because they appear at the top of the screen randomly, so they can appear over pits. So, like, if there's pits at the top of the screen, you might want to get those first, and then just go on a murder rampage. Finally, I have a few more tips in regards to Lode Runners which have screen scrolling. This is, for example, like the NES version does this, where not the whole level is visible. When this happens, it means that crossing the middle of the screen is very dangerous. Say in the NES version, the screen, like, you get pretty close to the edge of the screen before it starts to scroll, and it is kind of annoying, and it adds a lot of difficulty. I will say though, the NES version removes some difficulty by usually having fewer enemies. So I do think it's still the easier version, but this added difficulty kind of makes up for that. My advice for this is to really just expect enemies to be on your level. As we've talked about their pathing, they're very good at getting to your level. So like if there's a ladder, that they're on the other side of the screen that they can get to depending on how the level is, like you can almost guarantee it that as you cross the middle of the screen, you will run into enemies. Any of the enemies that you don't see, just expect them to be there. If you have enemies sort of chasing you when you do that, it is useful to delay them. Maybe digging one hole behind you, If there's two behind you, you might have to just dig two. Just be warned that that will possibly kill one of them. But otherwise, you want to really avoid having enemies on both sides of you. Being surrounded by them is a sure way to get yourself killed. Some of the games will let you pause the game and then freely scroll. The championship version on the NES apparently allows you to do this. Although I do not recommend, I don't recommend championship. If it's like your first go around with Lode Runner, that's a bad idea. But I don't know, I'm not your mom, I can't tell you what to do. So, but the WonderSwan version also lets you do this, and it kind of makes it so where like you kind of pause and then look around, unpause and then move, and then you end up doing that a lot. But it does help alleviate that issue. Well, that is all of the tips I have today. I really hope this helps people. I know I've probably rambled on for long. I'm not a brief person by any means, but I still may have missed something. So if you encounter something you're not sure how to deal with, you can always ask me for help. I love doing that. I love when people ask me for help. It's actually my job in real life. So, yeah. Yeah. That is it for me for now. So I will leave off there. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you next time.